All right, well, welcome everyone. Excited to have you all for the second installment of our Transforming Science Teaching, Planning for the Post-COVID New Normal. Um, Today, I'm excited to have Annmarie and Kathy here to talk about developing culturally responsive focal phenomena to anchor instruction and thinking about students and community values as a way of anchoring what we teach. I want to acknowledge and thank the UCI Teacher Academy, as well as Schools First Credit Union for supporting this program, as well as the UCI CalTeach Science and Math Preparation Program, of which I am the director and helping coordinate our activities. Want to remind you that this is part of a 5-talk series, and the first couple will be done as of today. We will have these recorded and videos up soon, but want to let you know, and I'll remind you again at the end, that our next presentation will be on supporting linguistically diverse students in STEM with K. Renee Pullen. And then the following one will be with Wanda Faye Bryant, who we're excited to have here with us today as well, on quad text sets, a framework to engage all learners in scientific practice and work towards mastering complex texts. And our last presentation will be on developing place-based agricultural science distance learning materials with Lori Anderson, and a project that she's working on in Hawaii. And then we hope to have everybody come together at the end in June to really think about action that we will take towards next year. And I'll post the link for registering for the next event. And before I introduce our speakers, I wanted to take a moment and acknowledge the land that I'm on, that we are all on. I'm going to drop in the chat the link to nativeland.ca if you would like to look up the land which you are occupying. Please feel free to do that. Feel free to drop it in the chat. And today, I think Annmarie and Kathy are in the vicinity of UC Irvine here in Southern California, located in traditional homelands of the Yahachman and Tongva people, where we are uninvited guests. The Yahachman and Tongva continue to act as stewards of their ancestral lands as they have for thousands of years in the face of ongoing settler colonialism. Both the Yahachman and Tongva nations continue to claim their place in their traditional territory. We'd like to honor and respect the diverse Native and Indigenous peoples connected to this territory on which we virtually gather today. All right, so the plan for today will be, I'll provide some introductions of our speakers, and then they will engage us in some thinking and presentation. And then we'll have some time to talk about it, and then we'll close and provide some additional information. At the bottom of here, and I'll drop it in the chat as well, is the link to register for the Teacher Academy mailing list in case you want to get information on other presentations from us and from others. All right, so with that, let me introduce Annmarie and Kathy. So very excited to have them here. They are currently both seniors here at UC Irvine in the CalTeach program, completing their student teaching in the midst of their EdTPA. So grateful to have them take some time from their busy schedules to present to us today. Both of them are phenomenal professional development presenters. They have done multiple presentations here in Southern California, and really have been thinking about how to connect students, their communities, and science teaching. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Annmarie and Kathy.
Well, thanks so much, Doran. And I also want to say I'm thankful. Annmarie and I are both thankful for being here. And we're also excited to learn from you all because, again, we are new teachers. And I'm just really excited to learn from each other here. All right, so let's get started. So our presentation today is going to be focusing on developing culturally responsive focal phenomena to anchor our instruction. So our little overview for our day today, you're going to experience our lesson as a high school biology student, so our day one launch. We're then going to discuss the background of our lesson, strategies we use to find culturally responsive focal phenomena, and then considering equity, and then have a chance to go into breakout rooms to discuss some considerations and practices, and lastly, have some reflection and question time. All right, so again, this is our day one launch. So this lesson was planned originally to be taught last year around April or May. So just keep these things in mind as we launch this lesson and you all act as our high school students living in Garden Grove in Orange County. Okay, so for our day one launch, our focal phenomena is the effect of air quality on COVID-19. And so we would start this lesson by asking students, how has COVID-19 affected your daily life? And before I open this conversation up to you all as high school students, I just want to give some context and background. So again, this was taught during the beginning of the pandemic in about April or May. And so we would teach it a lot differently if it were taught to be taught today. So back then when the pandemic was just starting, there was a lot of things that were unknown and students had lots of concerns. And so we wanted to give them a space to sort of address these concerns and share their experiences with their peers because they were all experiencing this. If we were to teach it today, we know that the pandemic has been really devastating for our students. And there's been loss of family and friends, financial instability, housing insecurity. And so if we were to teach it today, we'd want to make sure to acknowledge that possible trauma that students are bringing into the classrooms and helping them find resources within the school and community and for their mental and physical health. Okay, so I'm now gonna open up the discussion as if we were all high school students. So let's put our little student hats on. So welcome everyone. So I know we've been talking a lot about the pandemic. We've been hearing things on the news, seeing things on your TikToks. But I want to invite you to share, how has COVID-19 affected your own daily life? So remember, we're living in Garden Grove. It's April of 2020. What's going on? How have you been affected?
So, as a high school student, quote unquote, I would go out a lot with my friends. But after the pandemic hit, I haven't been able to see them for a very long time.
Thanks so much, Besma. And I know a lot of us are missing our friends. We don't get to go out as much. Miss Bryant says, I can't hang out like I used to. I know, I definitely miss hanging out with you all. Yeah, and because we can't hang out, I've been just staying home, right? Miss Olivia says, I can't visit my grandparents. Yeah, missing some family members, missing our friends. Yeah, so we've been staying home. Does anyone drive less now? Because we have to stay home? I know I've been saving some gas money. Dr. Zinger says, I don't drive at all. Walking everywhere for now. Miss Jasmine Cruz says, I'm saving food money. Yeah, so in these first couple of months, we've been staying home, you know, we don't really drive anywhere because we can't go out. We're not going out. We're saving some money on food, not eating out as much. All right, so again, we have this, we kind of share that same experience that we're not really going out as much. We're not driving. And so I want us to think to ourselves, do you think COVID-19 has affected our environment because of that? So in the chat, I want you to share some ideas. How has COVID-19 affected the environment?
Well, given the stay-at-home order, it was like really strict when the pandemic first happened. So less cars means less emissions of CO2 and other greenhouse gases. So
thanks so much, Besma. I really do appreciate it. Yeah, so Besma just shared that because stay-at-home orders have been pretty strict, we're not really driving out to go out anymore, right? So there's maybe less air pollution, less carbon dioxide emissions, less greenhouse gases. And so I want us to explore those exact things, those exact air pollution in some nearby cities. And Miss Annmarie is going to help us do that.
All right, thank you for that, Miss Becerra. So we just kind of talked about maybe this has something to do with the impact on the environment, right? We're not going out anymore. Besma brought up, right, that maybe this has something to do with air pollution and carbon dioxide emissions, right? So we're going to kind of zero in on that and see, being at home, has this made an effect on the air pollution? Has it made any impact? Has it not made, has it made a really big impact? And we're going to look at 2 cities nearby. So we're in Garden Grove right now in Orange County, and we're going to look at 2 cities nearby in Anaheim. So many of you, maybe you know Anaheim by Disneyland, right? Also here in Orange County. And we're also going to be looking at Long Beach, which is kind of on the other side in Los Angeles County, okay? And we're going to be looking at some real data to kind of observe what's going on with air pollution. Has it been changing? Okay. And specifically, we're going to look at nitrogen dioxide. Okay. So for this data, I'm going to go ahead and give you all some time to look at this air quality index key. So I'll go ahead and give you about 30 seconds to kind of look at this on your own. All right, and then can I get some responses in the chat or unmuted? What do you notice about this air quality index key? What are some patterns that you notice? All right, so I'm seeing a response in the chat from Besma. As the numerical value increases, the health risks also increase. That's exactly it, right? So at the very top in green, you'll notice that the numerical value 0 to 50, it looks like that's good air quality, right? It's considered satisfactory. Whereas if we look at the very bottom in red, greater than 300 is considered hazardous, right? And it tells you the entire population is even likely to be affected, right? And there definitely is something about health risks from air, absolutely. So kind of keep this key in mind as we go through our next activity, where we're going to analyze some data, real data, which is really cool, in these surrounding cities. Okay, so this is kind of how you kind of read this. Okay, so on the very left, you'll notice that I've circled for you the months. Okay, so at the very bottom, we see September of 2019. And then above that, we see May 2020, which is where we're at right now. Okay, and then there's another circle. So we see days of the month. And we're going to read that going from left to right. So that first square right under days of the month would be considered the first day of the month, whereas on the very right, that's going to be considered the 31st day of the month. Okay. All right. And again, we're kind of focusing on today nitrogen dioxide, which is listed as NO2. So in the chat, before we kind of go into our breakout rooms and analyze this data, looking at this data, what is the numerical value of nitrogen dioxide, that's right, concentration of May 1st, 2020. So what is the numerical value of the nitrogen dioxide concentration of May 1st, 2020? What do we think? Now go ahead and wait because I'm seeing some responses come in. I'll give you some wait time in case you're still looking. Again, the question is, what would be the numerical value of nitrogen dioxide concentration of May 1st, 2020? All right, and it looks like a lot of us agree that it would be 13, and that is absolutely correct. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna go into breakout rooms, and we're gonna be analyzing this data, comparing Anaheim, again, here in Orange County, to Long Beach in LA County. Okay, and in your breakout rooms, we're gonna answer 3 questions. So the first question is going to be, I think it's loading, there you go. How does air pollution affect our health? Number 2, compare and contrast the nitrogen dioxide data between Long Beach and Anaheim. And number 3, hypothesize what factors contribute to the change in air quality between October 2019 and May 2020. Okay, any questions before we go into our breakout rooms? And what we're gonna do is we're gonna edit this presentation here. So I've just linked it in the chat for you. And then you can go ahead and respond to whatever breakout room number you are in. All right, any questions before we get started? All right, so we're gonna do about 10 minutes. Do your best to see what you can come up with, and then we're gonna come back and talk about this. And that kind of ends our little session of you being our high school students. Thank you for participating with us. And so that was kind of how our first day would have started in our lesson in this unit. And then after that, we would go into a lot of activities where they would start to see this bridge between COVID-19, air quality. They would look at where they live and all of that fun stuff, and kind of compare it to connecting it back to what does that look like for me in my community. Okay, so now we're going to kind of break it down, how we plan this lesson, and go a little bit more into culturally responsive focal phenomenon.
Thanks so much, Ms. Ngo. So that brings us to the starting point, which I feel like that was one of the most difficult things to find. You know, where do we start when we're trying to find a culturally relevant focal phenomena to anchor our instruction? And what we really tried to do was connecting our lesson to students' backgrounds and helping them find science within those backgrounds. And so again, this lesson was taught when the pandemic was fairly new, and we knew that there was a lot of concerns and questions about who is at risk. So a lot of students were wondering, you know, am I at risk? Are my families at risk? You know, does where I live affect how at risk I am? And we really wanted to use this lesson to help them answer some of those questions that they had for themselves. And so we were teaching this in Garden Grove. So again, you just played the role of Garden Grove high school students. And that is why we chose neighboring cities that they were familiar with. So Anaheim, which is really nearby in Orange County, and Long Beach, which is in LA County. And by looking at these, at the air quality within these 2 different cities, we wanted students to be able to answer those questions. Am I at a greater risk of having more severe symptoms from COVID-19 based on where I live? And our focal phenomena here was connecting that air quality aspect to it. Does air quality where I live contribute to the COVID-19 death count? All right, and that brings us to our sort of standard and the environmental principles and concepts. So connecting to this environmental principle and concept, that's kind of where we made that connection to social and environmental justice. By showing that connection between human populations and natural systems, and how those natural systems can also affect us back. And as we know, some neighborhoods are more affected than others by their natural system. And again, this can go into a conversation about the histories of redlining, inequities in different neighborhoods. So I know today there's like inequities in vaccination. So those are different bridging points we can use to sort of get to that social justice aspect. I know Dr. Zinger was mentioning Miss Wanda Bryant's use of connecting to water quality in Flint, Michigan. That's also a great way to incorporate these environmental justice aspects into your lessons. So again, relating to water sources and inequities in our neighborhoods.
So kind of going off of that, we wanted to plan an end of the unit assessment that kind of offered our students some sort of solution. So again, thinking back to when we planned this in March 2020, everything was kind of new. There was a lot of uncertainty, I think, for our students and also for us as educators, that we wanted to give our students kind of their voice back, to feel like there was something that they could do that could make a difference. So we came up with this assessment for them to write a letter to their senator. And back then they had this option to write a letter about an environmental initiative to combat air pollution. But now looking at it, if we were to kind of adjust this lesson now, we could even give them the choice of writing a proposition about vaccination distribution, because we know that COVID-19 has been disproportionately affecting the communities around us. So again, the purpose of this was to kind of help our students realize that their actions do have an impact. We wanted to empower them to feel like there are things that they could do even though they're young, and to give them that sense of being a young citizen and doing something with their voice and showing that it does matter. And again, kind of going back to Kathy's point, incorporating that environmental justice piece as well. So at the beginning of this school year, I'm a student teacher right now. I actually had the honor of teaching this lesson to my 10th grade biology students. And I actually got some students that emailed me and were like, hey, Miss Ngo, can I send this letter out? And I was like, of course you can. And I think that was one of the first times that I really saw the impact it made to be culturally responsive, right? So being in the CalTeach program, we learn a lot about being culturally responsive and how important it is. And having that moment where I taught this lesson and seeing how engaged my students were, because this was something that mattered to them, it was really rewarding to see that it does make a difference to tend to who they are and their common experiences. And I find that when I do that now in my classroom, my students want to engage, they want to learn, and they're interested in science, even when they came into the classroom thinking like, oh, I'm not a science person, right? So I think that's something that really kind of spoke out to me and made me realize that this is something that I should keep working towards, even though sometimes it is hard to find culturally responsive focal phenomenon. So now we're going to kind of go into strategies that we have for finding this culturally responsive focal phenomenon in your classrooms outside of just our lesson that we've presented today. So for our lesson, oh, sorry. Did you want to say something, Darren?
Yeah, can I add one thing? I was in the room with Liv and Wanda, and I just want to kind of share what was happening in that room and also the potential of what this can open up to other things, right? So, and Wanda and Liv, please feel free to chime in if you'd like. And so like one of the things that we noticed is there was like a lot of natural curiosity around some things, and we were kind of even going beyond this whole area, like what would pollution look like in other parts of Southern California. So it's funny, and I'll just drop this in the chat, right? This is kind of the place where you can look at all of this. And it's interesting that Anaheim and Long Beach actually both have relatively good air quality. When you compare it to like downtown LA and other parts of Los Angeles, the air quality is actually much worse. And we were curious about Orange County kind of farther south, and there really isn't even a whole lot to even measure the air quality in Orange County, which kind of raises these questions about inequity and all these other issues. But just the point that I wanted to share is that in that space, we were able to have this rich conversation that could expand beyond even what you initially presented, that would prompt students to look for additional data or other things that could be particularly interesting to them, of where their grandparents might live or other people might live, as they started digging into this. And we were also asking these questions about the nature of these cities, right? I mean, Anaheim is more of a tourist city, like you said, and they have cars, right? So, you know, you would expect a lot of cars there, but Long Beach is a more industrial city. So maybe not as many cars, but there's just pollution from industry. And Wanda was asking these questions, well, is there a difference between these pollutants, right? And then we started talking about trucks, right? And like, I know that diesel isn't very good, but I don't know what's not really good in diesel. And does that contribute to these particular gases? And it really opened up all these doors for us to potentially explore, to get a lot smarter about these things that kind of came up on our own because we really were curious and wanted to kind of know more about it. I don't know, Wanda or Liv, if you want to chime in with anything.
I would just add, now that you put that map up, Duran, where you want students to ask their own questions regarding that map. You know, like you said, we did come up with questions on our own based on the data we were presented with. But I'm just curious to know what kind of questions the students would come up with looking at the map you put in the chat. And also having a conversation about how would you go about investigating those questions. Those are my initial thoughts.
Definitely. And I'm glad that you both brought that up. I think that those are really important considerations. I think when we had originally planned this lesson, we were definitely looking at what are local cities around them that they would know. But now that I'm thinking of, you know, if we were to give them just this map of California, what would they say, right? What questions would they come up with? And I think that would be really interesting. I feel like sometimes as a teacher, I think for me at least, I am not very good at being flexible sometimes. That sometimes being in that position of, you know, here you go, here's a map, come up with some questions and we're going to investigate that. I think for me, at least as a new teacher, can be really scary, right? But definitely, yeah, I agree that students definitely want to see their questions answered. And if I were to kind of give them this map, I can imagine kind of having maybe even my students giving them that autonomy to investigate a different part of California that they're interested in. Maybe they came from a different state even. And then having them do their own research on what are the major sources of pollution in those areas, right? So I think that would be a really interesting and like fruitful class discussion to maybe even do, I can imagine, some sort of like gallery walk of different students presenting different areas, and maybe even working in groups with areas that they are interested in. I don't know if that answers your question, but kind of going off of that, that's what I imagine.
Well, and I mean, I wonder, as both of you have shared, of, you know, we keyed into a particular thing. You were really going for, you know, this pre and post COVID, but I could even imagine where one group, to your point, is doing this pre and post COVID and looking at air quality and how it relates to traffic, exactly like you said. But somebody else might look at, why does downtown LA have such, you know, worse conditions than anyone, right? They're kind of seeing different things. And ultimately, regardless of whether they're looking at pre and post COVID, or if they're looking at a contrast between different parts of Southern California, they're looking at what you're going for underneath this lesson, right? With issues of equity and social justice, and also environmental justice issues that are there. So the underlying things are still kind of focused on the same things, but the particular thing that they're investigating is potentially just a little bit more connected to who they are, potentially where they come from, or what they might be concerned about. So that's going to have me thinking now.
Definitely. And I appreciate these considerations. It's always nice to have these conversations because I feel like I learn a lot from hearing all of you kind of speak and learning from your considerations and what you think about when you plan a lesson. So I think definitely kind of drawing on where they're from and who they are, giving them that autonomy, I think is really important. So I think when it comes to this lesson, we were definitely trying our best to kind of draw on this common experience of COVID-19 and where they live. But of course, I think expanding on that I feel like there's so many ways you can go about it and be creative with it. And that was kind of the way that we chose to kind of center our focal phenomenon on who our students were. So definitely giving that autonomy, being more familiar with the school around us, the surrounding community for sure. And even thinking of things like social climate and current events, right? So when we're talking about this, we're talking about COVID-19. We can even bring in conversations about vaccine distribution, and giving our students that option. They can kind of choose, like you said, Doran, what matters most to them and what they want to investigate. And so another way that we kind of thought about finding culturally responsive focal phenomenon was getting to know our students' interests and their cultures and who they are as people. And so some strategies that we have were surveying students about their cultural practices, interests, home languages, and even important issues that matter to them. Or even in the beginning of the year, having them create collages about their hobbies or clubs they're in on campus outside of our classrooms, or doing icebreakers to get to know who they are. And sometimes I even find that after that, I still have a hard time making my focal phenomenon culturally responsive. And so in those cases, I do my best to just find focal phenomenon that works, and then adjusting it to fit my students' needs and interests. So if I find a phenomenon that maybe it's about like soccer, but I know all of my students are in softball, then maybe I'll kind of tweak it in that sense to make it more related to who they are.
And going off a little bit about what Annmarie shared about students' needs and interests. So we planned this lesson as juniors in the CalTeach program. And since then, I feel like we've grown a lot, and we're still continuing to grow. And so back then, we didn't really consider supports for all our students. And so we wanted to make sure to include some of those in our lesson today. So just to always remind us that we still want to reach all our students and have equitable practices. So we kind of shared some adjustments we would make for our lesson to help it reach more students. So for multilingual learners, we discussed including adjunct displays, videos, providing sentence starters or frames, read, write, pair shares, and word walls. So that way, when students are discussing their ideas, maybe with a partner, they get to write them down before, discuss it with a partner, and then be prepared and be more comfortable to share it on a larger scale. So all of our students feel comfortable sharing with the classroom. And our students who struggle with reading can also benefit from some of these things we mentioned for our multilingual learners. And we also thought it was helpful here to guide them to question the authors of articles and help them evaluating sources, and also providing anticipation guides. So I think for me, anticipation guides have been really helpful for my class. It kind of helps my students connect our discussions in the class and what we've been learning about, and helping them bridge to the reading. So what's the importance of the reading? How does it fit with our lesson? And I feel like making those connections has really helped me reach students who have been struggling with reading, and just helping them find that relevance. And we also know that we also have students in our classrooms who need bigger challenges. And so for this, we thought it's important to include maybe some supplementary articles or videos, pose more challenging questions. And we also have this resource of Newsella, so they can read at higher language levels. I'm not sure the exact terminology, but at a different reading level. And we also have this idea of allowing students to maybe move forward in the lesson and explore some things and model their own thinking to help guide their peers as well. So drawing on those strengths that some students have, and allowing them to share that with their peers. Okay, so now we kind of want to open up the conversation to kind of discuss how we can work on keeping these things in mind for a post-COVID world. So I feel like there's been a lot of talk about, this year, students really didn't learn anything. It's kind of like a wasted year. And I kind of really hate that because it's not a wasted year. I feel like there's been so much learning that has gone on. Our students have learned so much about themselves, about their interests and needs. And, you know, our students have gone through so much, and so have teachers. And so again, this year is not a year of loss. It's a year of gaining new knowledge. And so we need to remind ourselves that all this knowledge we learned through COVID, through teaching virtually, by discussing those needs of our students, we want to apply that and keep that in mind as we plan for a post-COVID world. Because when we go back to class, it's not going to be like it was before, and we don't want it to be. We want it to be different. We want to take these things we've learned and bring them back into our classroom. And so considerations, so some questions we want you to keep in mind as we move forward into our breakout rooms is just to remind you, how will you use what you learned during distant learning to inform your culturally responsive teaching in a post-COVID new normal? And how are you listening to your students' needs and considering potential trauma? Because again, this past year with COVID has been a learning experience, but it has also been a very painful year for a lot of us. And so how are you bringing those things into the classroom post-COVID?
All right, so with those considerations in mind, something that I wanted to share that I have heard in one of the faculty meetings I've gone to is they were kind of saying that this past year has been a really reactive year, right? We're constantly reacting to what's going on. There's always something new. Sometimes teachers don't know the answer either. And we want to shift our thinking to be more proactive instead of reactive. So I wanted to share that because I really liked that. And so in our 2 breakout rooms, you can go ahead and choose whichever breakout room you feel like you want to have a conversation about. And so our first breakout room is more about kind of considerations. We got a question about autonomy, so we wanted to kind of bring that up with social justice. So what are some tensions between teacher autonomy and the systems that we work under? And how can that affect the incorporation of social justice into our own programs and lessons? In the second room, we have more kind of about the practices that we can kind of work on and more actionable items for classroom teachers. So consider the students that you work with. What are important cultural practices, interests in school and community contexts and issues that matter to your students? And you can brainstorm some focal phenomenon centered around those considerations. So again, these are just guiding questions. You can kind of just see where the conversation takes you. And we'll go ahead and open up the breakout rooms for you to choose whichever one you want to go in. All right.
And again, we do have a Jamboard where you can share these ideas, and those questions are listed on there.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms. And if you don't have the option to choose, go ahead and let us know, and we can put you in the breakout room of your choice.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So I hope you had some fruitful conversations and were able to maybe discuss. I know these questions in the breakout rooms weren't set questions. Your conversation could have gone wherever they wanted to, but I hope you got to record some ideas. And now we want to give you a chance to reflect on slide 3 of that Jamboard we shared. So on the first 2 slides, if you could look over some bullet points that the other break room had, and maybe some that your other partners wrote within your breakout room. I want you to use these as sort of inspiration and record one idea or practice that you want to learn about or incorporate into the classroom when we're back in the classroom. So again, what do you want to do or incorporate into your classroom post-COVID? All right, so I'm seeing some of you are agreeing with some of the things your partner shared, maybe adding little hearts, saying things, there's things you agree with. And again, I hope you, as you look through these slides and some of those questions we posed, you got to reflect and really consider what's important to bring into the classroom next year. All right, and then we wanted to share this other little resource that sort of helps us anchor our phenomena within a lesson. So here we have a phenomena which we can then connect to tasks and our NGSS lesson, so to make sure it's NGSS aligned. And that's a little resource we wanted to share. We will be sharing these slides with you, which you will be able to access and use some of these maps here.
And we've also kind of compiled a bunch of other resources for looking for focal phenomenon. And then again, thinking about how we transition from focal phenomenon to, culturally responsive focal phenomenon. So this is also going to be accessible to you as well in the folder and stuff. And I think that's all that we have. Are there any questions that you all want to ask or anything that kind of came to mind as we had these conversations in the breakout rooms? All right. Okay, so it looks like there are no questions. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's a Monday in the afternoon. Thank you for coming and thank you for learning with us and challenging us to think about focal phenomenon in science and teaching in different ways. We'll absolutely be sharing all of these slides with you. And thank you for your time. And if you have any questions and you want to contact us, that will also be on the next slide as well. Thank you so much, everyone.